Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Barney Savage. I'm the Interim Director of Policy and Stakeholder Relations here at OASW, the Ontario Association of Social Workers, and welcome to this webinar on social work, auto insurance, and advocacy. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to start, if you can go to the next slide, just to give you a sense of how the next hour and 15 minutes will operate. We very much welcome your questions, and you can add them anytime in the Q&A box, and we will respond during the Q&A period. Please feel free to use the chat function, which you're probably familiar with, which you can use to connect individually with other people on the webinar, or share thoughts with the whole group or with a subset of the whole group. We would request that that all the comments maintain a respectful and inclusive tone that makes space for everyone in the spirit of social work. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and the webinar is scheduled to conclude at 5:45. So at this point, I just like, in the spirit of a continuing welcome, I'd just like to hand things over to the CEO of OASW, Ajiri Evi. Ajiri.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know that OASW has a long history of advocacy in the area of auto insurance. And as a registered social worker myself, I just want to quickly highlight some of my background in terms of some of the work that I've done leading to my current role. My background stems, around social work within child welfare, doing a lot of research, education, community mobilization, and most importantly, enjoying the work around Afrocentric counseling, supporting persons who identify as Black. So I am very grateful to the members of the MBA committee of OASW. We are able to advocate as an association on the issues because of the hard work of committee members who keep us up to date on the day-to-day struggles of working in this area. I am particularly grateful to our chair, Kim Dugan. Kim, you have worked so hard to make sure that social workers in auto insurance are treated with respect and fairness, and that those seriously injured in auto accidents get the help that they require. It was a pleasure to join your committee meeting just a few weeks ago, and I'm so honored to celebrate this webinar and to welcome everyone to a wonderful time together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajiri. So we have a few presenters today, and their names and affiliations are there. I won't introduce them, but I'll ask them to introduce themselves as they take the virtual podium. I did want to let people know, as Ajiri mentioned, this work is really being led by a group of OASW members who work in social work, the Social Work Committee. So if you could go to the next slide, please. These are the members of the committee, and I just want to reiterate what Ajiri said, which is that we really couldn't do this work in auto insurance without connecting to the everyday experience that social workers have in this field. So like Ajiri, I just want to say to Kim and Eden, to Dina, Ilda, Robin, Camilla, and Mandy, thank you very much for all the work you do on behalf of your colleagues in this space, because it's really important stuff. So our objectives for today, for the next hour and 15 minutes or so, we want to give our members in this space an update on our work and on recent developments in the motor vehicle accident sector. We want members to have the opportunity to exchange information about experiences that they've had, especially experiences with insurance companies. And then we want to receive some feedback from you, our members, on what we can be doing better to represent social workers who work in this area. So we wanted to take just a couple of minutes to ask you a couple of questions so that we know who is on this webinar. So I'll ask Ifra to bring up the first poll, which is about how long you have been working with. Oh, okay, they're both together, right? Okay, so I'll ask you to answer both questions if you don't mind. So first is just to get a sense of how long you have been working with MVA clients. And then the second, just to give us a kind of a sense of your the proportion of your clients who are MVA clients. If you could just fill out that, whether it's 1 to 30% or 31 to 60, 61 to 90, or over 90%. So we'll give you a few more seconds to answer those two questions. And we'll take a look at the answers. Okay. We've got lots of people who are relatively young in their careers or new to MVA, which is fantastic. And an interesting mix about what percentage of your clients are MVA clients. Lots in that 30 to 60 and a big chunk in the 30 to 60% and 60 to 90%. So that's great. Thank you very much for voting on that. That gives us all a sense of who's on the call today. I wanted to take a minute or two before I hand it over to the committee members just to give people a sense of what have been our key demands of government when we speak to them about auto insurance. So the two things that we have told government most recently is about including registered social workers in the professional service guidelines. And the second one is about permitting social workers to authorize the OCF 18, the assessment and treatment plans. We conveyed those recommendations to government in written form formally a year ago when the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, or FSRA, was doing a formal consultation on auto insurance at the request of the government. And our understanding is that the FSRA has conveyed some recommendations to government. We have not heard any news about a government response to that, to those recommendations. And we have had meetings with people in government just to convey those two messages about how they can streamline and improve motor vehicle accident coverage, particularly in the context of the government's commitment to reducing red tape and streamlining processes. I also just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the information that we have gathered from our members who work in the MVA space. So we have 10,000 members at OASW, so we often survey our members, or sometimes a subset of our members. And so most recently, we did a survey of social workers in the auto insurance space in 2022. So that's getting a little bit old. But the question we wanted to find out is whether or not people had their fees arbitrarily lowered by insurers. And as you can see from that response, it's an extremely common phenomenon, and we can speculate about whether those numbers have increased since 2022. We are advised often to be putting our government relations demands less in the context of the interests of social workers and more in the interests of the public. So one of the things we wanted to look at was those people who have had their fees lowered by insurers. Are they people who have thought about getting out of this line of work? In other words, is there a correlation between people having their fees challenged more often and wanting to leave the sector. And that was our hypothesis, and it turned out to be true. So we can see from this that those numbers are of people who had their fees challenged by insurers. So you can see that among those OASW members who work in auto insurance, who are thinking of leaving the auto insurance sector, more of them are people who have had their fees challenged. So that probably doesn't surprise anybody on this, but it's nice to have the data that tells the story. And then I'll just give you one more piece of data from the survey we did, which relates, of course, to our other big demand of government, which is on over the last year, how many of your OCF 18s have been rejected or partially approved? And you can see there that, it's obviously, there's a lot of experience with people having their OCF 18s rejected or partially approved. So that's a very quick introduction from me, and I'm going to turn things over to Kim to talk a little bit about her experience and her knowledge. So Kim, over to you.
Thanks, Barney. So, at the moment, what we're hearing from our social work colleagues, all of us on the committee, and what we talk among ourselves, right, is just that we're feeling exceedingly frustrated and upset around the hourly rate issues that we're experiencing. And what's being presented to us by insurers in terms of our rates and our roles make us feel, completely often misunderstood, misrepresented, disrespected, diminished, devalued. But when we talk about hourly rates, it's my hope that, what we're advocating for is not just ourselves, but also our profession. And even more importantly, the ability of clients to have access to the quality of care and the expert treatment that social workers are able to provide. Our services and expertise is underpinned by, years of social work education, practicums, experience, internships, training, all of which is well suited to the unique needs of the people that we serve in this sector. Next slide, please. So when we start to look at the concept of setting fees and reasonableness, I think it's a good place to start is to look at what our college says, the Regulatory College for Social Workers. And when we look at our college's standards of practice, they say that when social workers set their fees, factors that might influence the amounts charged include the time and effort spent, the complexity of the issues, and the skills and the expertise that's required. Our college also says that social workers must ensure that they do not charge fees that are excessive in relation to the services performed. Next slide, please. So what does that last statement mean? Well, when we go to the glossary section of our standards of practice, this is what our college has to say. They consider an excessive fee to be an amount that exceeds what's considered usual, reasonable, and customary, and that this may be determined by comparing other registrants' charges for similar services. Next slide, please. And then when we dive further into that, I think it's important to take a look at what these terms, usual, reasonable, and customary, mean. We usually see these terms in health insurance. They're most commonly used by extended health benefits providers. So that'd be like your Sun Life and Canada Life and Blue Cross. And if you got access to extended health benefits, you probably notice these terms there. And I did a little bit of digging, and the best definitions I could find to help explain what these terms mean are the following. So usually refers to fees that are an individual healthcare. The fee that an individual healthcare provider typically charges for a fee or service or procedure. It considers the frequency that the same rate is charged by a specific provider for a given service. Customary speaks to the range of fees charged by the majority of healthcare providers in a specific community or geographic area for a particular service. So it reflects the standard rate for a service within that area. Reasonable is a little more trickier and nuanced, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on reasonable. A fee is considered reasonable if it's comparable to the customary charges for the same service in the same geographic area, and if it reflects the complexity or difficulty of the service provided. And what is reasonable is also a little more subjective because a reasonable fee can also be considered such if it takes into account unusual circumstances or complications that require additional time, skill, or experience on part of the provider. So, in general terms, when you look at reasonable, you're typically saying, okay, like it means what's fair, what's not excessive, what's accepted by all parties involved. But then there's context to it, right? That we see in the above, definition. And there's a couple of contexts that I think are important to review around, hourly rates in this sector. So it makes complications, and I mean, they're relevant here. So let's take a look at the next slide. The first issue or variable, I think, right, that creates some context that I think is important to understand is the context of the professional services guideline. It's a document that was created and put into regulation about 22 years ago in 2003. The regulated health professions who were and continue to be subject to the PSG, such as chiro, psychologists, OTs, physios, speech paths, etc., at the time all had to swallow a rough overall average of a 30% reduction in their hourly rates compared to what they had historically received based on the usual and customary fees. So that's not nothing. And for comparison purposes, now in 2025, OTs and physios, whose entry to practice requirements are a master's degree, earn $99 an hour when they work with folks who are in the non-catastrophic tier of benefits, which is about 97% of all claims. And they earn just shy of $120 an hour when they work with people who are in the catastrophic tier of benefits. Speech paths, who also have entry to practice requirement of a master's degree, receive $112.22 an hour for non-CAT cases and $134.17 for cases where the person has access to the catastrophic tier of benefits. Unregulated providers earn $58.19 an hour for non-CAT cases and $89.09 per hour for CAT cases. And I mention these things to demonstrate that since 2003, this sector, the accident benefit sector as a whole, has paid below the usual and customary rates for healthcare services. And this is important contextual information because it's influential in our disputes and it underpins some of the arguments that are made around reducing hourly rates for social workers. But, when we think about context, we also can't ignore ourselves, right? What about context in ourselves? So establishing a reasonable hourly rate for work in private practice means, unlike being an employee in a hospital, for example, we don't get paid for sick days. We don't get paid vacation days. We don't get paid stat holidays. We don't receive benefits, pensions, bonuses, educational days, allowances. I'm not saying that everybody in an employed situation gets that either, but definitely you don't get it in private practice. And we have overhead and costs of business like liability insurance and equipment and rent. And the actual cost and value of these things is not often understood by those who've not worked in private practice, but yet they're significant in terms of establishing a reasonable hourly rate. And then let's look at the context of a business owner, right? It's really difficult to attract social workers to your company and pay your staff a competitive hourly rate if you've been unreasonably restricted by an insurer in terms of what you're permitted to charge. And lastly, there's the perspective of our clients in that context too. They're often receiving just $400 a week in income replacement benefits. They're worried how they're going to pay their rent or their mortgage. They're also worried that, their benefits are going to be exhausted, and by paying a higher hourly rate, they might not get as much therapy or care that they need. Next slide, please. So from a context, sorry, hang on a sec. Oh, now it's over to Mandy. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mandy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. That's great. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Mandy. Common hourly rates applied by insurers. So the unregulated rate, many of you have probably heard of, and Kim made reference to earlier on the PSG, is 58.19 for non-cat and 89.09 for catastrophic claims. The market rate that I'm sure many of you have also heard of is $100, and the 91.43, which is based on 2 LAT decisions. Next slide, please, Afra. Thank you. Responses received when we try to address the issue, take it to the LAT. I can find another RSW or a healthcare provider to do the work for less. Send us copies of other cases where you have received the hourly rate from another adjuster within our company. There's some other, did we pop that into the chat if there's some other thoughts on that? Okay, so if you have some thoughts on that, please do share with us and pop that into the chat, and we'll hopefully be able to address later on. Top reason, oh, sorry, am I overdoing? Nope, last one. Top reasons insurers provide for reducing hourly rates. RSWs are not regulated healthcare professionals. Misuse of the PSG, so labeling RSWs as family or rehabilitation counselors. Also, ignoring FISCO bulletins on case manager pay, relying, sorry, one sec. Sorry, relying on the PSG unregulated provider list, over-reliance on LAT decisions, misrepresentation of registered social work market rates. And once again, please do share if you have some thoughts on some other reasons or other things that you have had happen for yourselves. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it along to Eden.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eden Dales. I'm glad to be here, hearing Kim and Mandy review all of those very real realities that we deal with. It's very frustrating to hear it again, but it is our daily experience. So I'm going to talk about issues that perpetuate challenges around our hourly rates. So widespread information on how registered social workers are regulated, their scope of practice, their competencies, and the authority to provide psychotherapy. So that's really misunderstood widely. Diversity among our registered social workers, our education, experience, specialization, certifications, geography, what settings we work in, what roles we provide, counselor, psychotherapist, case manager. It's all very varied and confusing. Wide range of rates. So registered social workers versus other regulated health care providers, like registered psychotherapists, OTs, nurses, and unregulated providers offering similar services. Oh, next slide. So also insurer approved rates vary even within the same company, even on the same file, even with the same adjuster, even in the same category of funding. Inconsistent OCF 18 completion, so different codes are used by social workers, different level of details put in the back page, different level of details put in the page of describing services, also not properly or fully completed, which triggers denials. Social work not covered by the PSG, so professional services guidelines does not list social workers, so they just stick us under family counselors, which is a very low rate. Adjusters control the approvals, and it's a real power imbalance because they're not clinicians and they decide what we're doing. Registered social workers can't certify OCF 18s, part 4 of the 18. So it undermines our credibility as professionals when we have to get another professional to agree that our treatment plan is worthy of being submitted. And the few remedies is that FSRA won't address complaints. So there's very few remedies. So FSRA won't address complaints. They immediately say, take it to a LAT if you have issues. Legal support is inconsistent because it costs, they don't get paid for LATs, and it costs a tremendous amount of time. It takes a long time to book a LAT, and a lot of lawyers aren't willing to do it. The outcomes are uncertain, and protected accounts are not always viable, or perhaps not something that either party wants to participate in, and it's a big risk for business owners. So you're left with, say, starting services and then not completing them. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Kim for the LAT discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Eden. So what we've said is social workers aren't on the professional services guideline. And sometimes insurers like to try and put us there as an unregulated provider. But when a profession is not on the professional services guideline, the professional services guideline says in that situation that the amounts are to be determined by the parties involved. So, okay, so then, you're in a situation, you've presented your treatment plan, your hourly rate, and the insurer says no, and they, dock you a day's wages or whatever. They lower your hourly rate, and you can't, convince them otherwise. So what do? You've not been successful to compel them, and they're not hearing you, and they're just doubling down. So the only recourse you have right now, any of us, is to go through the dispute resolution process, and you request a hearing at the License Appeal Tribunal, or the LAT. And it's then a LAT adjudicator that decides. But as Eden already mentioned, right, there's some challenges in as accessing the LAT. First you need the client's consent and the lawyer's agreement to apply to the LAT and go through the process. And not all clients or lawyers will agree to do that. My understanding is that, for many situations, the main reason is because it's really costly to go to the LAT. It's very time intensive. There's no costs awarded, meaning no one gets paid for their efforts, and it is really effortful. Lawyers spend a lot of time in preparation. They prepare and submit the application. They do research. They put together briefs. They attend case conference. They deal with motions. If it's an in-person hearing, then they prep for that hearing. They prep you. They prep others, and then you attend the hearing. And so. Other things to recognize, right, as Eden already mentioned, it's a really lengthy process. The time between application and the actual hearing can be upwards of a year. It can then take a long time, many months, until a decision is rendered, and there's no guarantee of a successful outcome. So it's risky. And you have to be able to decide in the meantime, right, how are you going to manage this situation around your hourly rates and service while all this is going on? Next slide, please. So I want to illustrate to everybody a little bit of what we're dealing with, right, at the LAT. So I did some research on and went to CanLII, and I searched for the terms social work and hourly rate. And this revealed 8 cases that I want to talk a little bit about. So this does not involve rates when it's psychotherapy, like for psychotherapists, registered psychotherapists. It's only specific to social workers. And so I found 8 cases popped up. 6 out of the 8 were written hearings, and 2 out of the 8 were in-person hearings. 3 of 8 cases were successful at the LAT, meaning the social workers' hourly rates were successfully argued. However, 5 of the 8 were not. 2 of the in-person hearings were successful, but 1 written hearing was also successful too. Next slide, please. So, the burden of proof. What's important to know, and I think informs how we ought to, some ideas, right, in terms of how we all move forward with some of this, we need to realize that, it's on us, right? The burden of proof around how to demonstrate how our hourly rate is reasonable is on us. And there's a couple of quotes here from, 2 of the LAT cases that talk about that. And the bottom one in particular says the onus is on the applicant to demonstrate that the proposed rate is appropriate on the basis of the provider's education, training, and experience. Next slide, please. So knowing that, let's take a look at what the insurers are saying, right? What are their arguments and the positions that they're doubling down on when it goes to the LAT? And here you see a few statements. One argument says that a social worker falls, and we've talked about this, under the category of an unregulated provider. Another insurer's argument is that unregulated providers, such as counselors, social workers, and psychotherapists, our rate is $58.19. So there's a couple of times this comes up already. Another position is that our rates are excessive, that 9143 is based on amounts that are generally payable for social workers in the community. And this, in that particular case, they also relied on a previous decision that said $100 an hour was reasonable hourly rate. Next slide, please. And, you know, more insurers' positions at the LAT. Another one saying 135, another insurer, right, is responding and they're saying 135 is excessive. And they justify their position by saying that social workers at hospitals get paid $29 an hour and WSIB pays $90 an hour. And we know you're not comparing apples and apples, right? Private practice costs and whatnot to hospital hourly rates. And I mean, most social workers tend to get paid more than $29 an hour in a hospital setting anyway. In another case, an insurer said that the case management services provided by a social worker was not therapy or a direct clinical intervention offered under the scope of social work practice, and that they should be paid less as a result. They felt that, you know, case management, that's paid at a $58.19 per hour rate, and that their offered $91.37 per hour was far more reasonable than that. So, you know, the question on being paid, and you're going to see this come up a little bit more, right? That the question of being paid based on our role versus our profession, it comes up, and it's something that we've got to reconcile even among ourselves. Next slide, please. So having looked at what insurers say, we can now look at what LAT adjudicators say when they determine what our hourly rate ought to be and whether we've successfully argued our stance. So in terms of cases where the applicant was not successful in demonstrating that their hourly rate for social work was reasonable and justified, we see LAT adjudicators saying things like the applicant didn't meet their onus to prove on the balance of probabilities that their hourly rate was reasonable and necessary. We see a LAT adjudicator saying the applicant's submissions and evidence was lacking in demonstrating. The applicant didn't provide persuasive evidence, and I'm not bound by previous decisions. Next slide, please. More of the same. In this first case example, we see an applicant, the adjudicator said that the applicant didn't submit a CV for the LAT hearing, even though the applicant, and by applicant, this is, you know, the lawyer and the client, right, who have applied on your behalf for your hourly rate, they're saying that even the applicant agreed that proper determination of the social worker's hourly rate would include an analysis of their training and experience. But no CV was given. There was no information provided about that social worker's credentials, their training, or when they became a social worker that would be helpful to the adjudicator. And in that case, the adjudicator notes that, again, right, they're not bound by previous decisions, because in this case, right, one of the arguments that was made to justify is, well, another case said that $130 an hour was good, so that was the basis of me choosing this rate. And that's not good enough in LAT proceedings. In some cases, we also see that the LAT adjudicator was not persuaded by the OASW's fees guideline. They assumed that the OASW's guideline was related to private practice, whereas, you know, I think it's more accurate to say that it was premised based on rates that would be appropriate for the MVA sector more than private practice. And again, right, we see that the adjudicator highlights that rates payable in this sector is generally lower than those charged in private practice. So that was, you know, their framework, and that speaks to, you know, the PSG, right, that we talked about a little bit earlier. Next slide, please. Again, unsuccessful outcomes. Adjudicator didn't understand that social workers are regulated health professionals, and even they decided to use the PSG to characterize social work, or, you know, what was being provided as rehabilitation counseling, which is an unregulated provider on the PSG. We see another case where there was insufficient evidence. We see another couple of examples where the applicant didn't meet their onus to demonstrate why they should be paid a higher hourly rate than what the insurers deemed appropriate. Next slide, please. This one, again, we see examples of lack of evidence provided concerning qualifications for the social worker. And another reference here, right, where social work services are characterized as an unregulated provider on the PSG. Next slide, please. More unsuccessful outcomes. Again, this one is more about that social workers in providing case management services, that we should be paid based on our role as a case manager because it is included in the PSG versus based on our profession. And in this particular case, this LAT adjudicator ignored fiscal bulletins that said that case managers are to be paid in accordance with our profession. This caused a big hubbub, at that time when this case came out, and Fisco then had to re-release that bulletin, reiterating the fact that case managers are to be paid based on their profession, not their role. So again, we see this role versus profession thing come up. So successful outcomes. Next slide, please. Finally, we get to look at a few successful outcomes, and here's a few things that adjudicators have said. One is there's no evidence that $130 is not the prescribed OASW rate. So in this case, the insurer failed at demonstrating the contrary. And this adjudicator says that they found it $130 to be reasonable. But they also said, to take some caution because they weren't saying that $130 was the precedent, or a conclusion, hourly rate to be applied for social workers in this sector forevermore. We also see here that a LAT adjudicator looked at the social workers' education, experience, and qualification and the OASW fee guideline and determined that $135 was appropriate in that case. Next slide, please. In this one, the adjudicator found that the social worker met their onus to prove on the balance of probabilities that the proposed rate for their case management services, so this was a social worker providing case management services, was appropriate based on their education, training, and experience. The adjudicator said, I'm persuaded by the social worker's credentials, and they didn't accept the fact that an effective case manager should be compensated at a lower hourly rate detached from their rate as a registered professional. And it was interesting in this case too, right, that the adjudicator was confused because the insurer disallowed the hourly rate on this case, but the insurer had approved the same hourly rate on another case with the same insurer within the very same week. So that was an interesting contextual piece too. So in response to some of what we've read, next slide, please. And what I want you guys to know first and foremost, and want to draw your attention to, is the fact that the regulatory status of social workers is recognized in the statutory accident benefits schedule. First and foremost, the SABs at Part 1, Section 3.1 includes social work in its definition of a regulated health profession, and it also defines a regulated health professional as a member of a regulated health profession. So, according to the SABs, social work is a regulated health profession, and therefore social workers are regulated health professionals. So please don't let insurers or anyone else use ignorance or spread misinformation concerning the regulatory status of social workers around denials and reasons for lowered hourly rates. Next slide, please. So in looking at the varying statements of LAT decisions that we just looked at, and I had the opportunity to go to the LAT this past June on the issue of my hourly rate, which thankfully had a positive outcomes and was one of the positive outcomes that was referenced in my earlier slide there. Here's what stood out for me in terms of some of the lessons. Revamp your curriculum vitae. Make it specific to the sector. Provide lots of detail regarding your coursework, your placements, your internships, post-grad education, training, your skills, your competencies. Make it clear, make it known. It's really important, right? Because I think of the ignorance around what our training is, what we do, right? Our regulatory status, our ability to provide psychotherapy, right? Under the regulated health, the RHP, Professions Act. Make sure your OCF 18 is robust and thorough. They use it at the LAT. They'll be going through it and teasing it apart. And, and it should hopefully provide the insurer, right? Make sure that they have enough information to determine the reasonableness of your hourly rate. Be prepared to state the premise upon which you've decided your hourly rate and how it's reasonable, and within the context, within the range, right, of your usual and customary rates. Or if it's lower than, right, and your rate considers the context of this sector, be prepared to say so. Anticipate arguments against your hourly rate and be prepared to defend against those arguments. Know your material, the relevant SABS guidelines, bulletins. Be prepared to speak to them, defend our profession, defend your education, your training, your experience, your expertise, the evidence-informed methodologies employed. Know your standards of practice in the code of ethics. Use them. Highlight any exceptions to the insurer's position about your hourly rate that you are aware of. For example, gosh, right, if they just approved your hourly rate over here and they're denying it over there, use that. Next slide, please. So, you know, having had my OCF 18 and my hourly rate, specific, just my hourly rate on my OCF 18 challenged by the insurer, I sort of came up with a few steps that maybe folks want to consider. First step is, you know, when you've come to an impasse, write a memo to the lawyer, lay it out the issues as you see them that argues against the insurer's rationale or the reliance on LAT decisions. Because right now there's a few insurers that are relying on a couple of LAT decisions that are really shoddy LAT decisions, if you ask me. I analyzed them, I went through these steps. Request support from the client and legal rep to take your issue to the LAT and ask them to request an in-person hearing. There's no guarantee that that'll be granted, but based on, you know, my experience and the lawyer who assisted me, which was David Levy at Howie Saxon Henry, they felt pretty strongly that taking it to having an in-person hearing would have a better chance of a successful outcome than a written hearing alone. So help the lawyer help you. No one knows you, your skills, your services, your competencies, our standards of social work practice more than us. Provide the lawyer with the materials that you recommend to be presented as evidence, right? Help them help you. Your CV, your OCF 18, you know, show them the Ontario, like the Regulated Health Professions Act, that regulation, the Act for social workers, 1998, right? Print that off, send it to them. OASW materials, evidence of what is usual and customary hourly rates in Ontario and in your region. Don't rely on precedents of previous LAT decisions alone as arguments for your position. Each case is unique and individualized, and one does not necessarily influence the other. Your case is going to be primarily decided based on the merits of the evidence you provide, and make sure it's thorough. Be prepared, request prep by the lawyer if you go to an in-person hearing, and have them prepare you for your examination in chief and the cross-exam ahead of your in-person hearing. And oof, that's a lot. So I'm going to pass it over to Dina next to talk about some prevention strategies.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dina Ginsberg. Kim, thank you so much. That was a lot of information, and it's a bit overwhelming to think about all that we actually need to do and prepare our documentation and ourselves professionally for these kinds of instances. But I think that, I mean, wow, you did so much work for that, and you did have a successful outcome. So it worked in your case. I think, you know, the most important thing is that we together as social workers working in the sector are a united front here. And the information you presented, Kim, really dovetails with this kind of information that I'm going to be showing on these next couple of slides, really to have us, or as many of us, be doing the same things with our documentation, presenting the same information to insurance adjusters. So they're not the same way we're getting different information from every different adjuster we work with. We want to try to provide them with the same information as much as possible, that we're all doing the same thing. We're all on the same page. We're providing the same information. And maybe it might sink in a little bit more. But when we're all doing different things, some more than others, some more detailed than others, I think it just becomes very messy for them, the same way they're becoming increasingly messy for us. So Kim, you had mentioned about a CV. It is really important to submit a very robust, detailed CV along with your OCF 18, because obviously that will speak to the level of competence, training, years of experience, your certifications, all those kinds of things, and the scope of your practice. So good idea, if you're not doing it already, to submit your CV along with an OCF 18. On the back page of the OCF 18, as it says here, it's not enough just to say, I'm going to be providing counseling or psychotherapy. Really make this as detailed as possible. Show yourself off. Like, this is your time to shine on the back page of this OCF 18. So write about the evidence-based therapeutic modalities that you will be using with this specific client and why, that will help justify your rate. Okay, most of us have really incredible training. Show it off. And training very commensurate with psychologists who are doing this work and psych associates who are doing this work. So show it off, spell it out, and really make it as robust and detailed as possible. I know these last pages on OCF 18s can be cumbersome, but if they help eliminate some of this reduction in rate, it's worth it. And I think if we're all kind of doing the same thing on those back pages, strengthen numbers. And they, again, we'll see, we want to highlight the uniqueness and the strength and the credentials and training of social workers, specifically in this field and specifically working with this client population. Not everybody can work with this client population. They need very skilled, trained clinicians, so show it off. And then again, Kim, as you had mentioned, show alignment with our standard of practice, reasonable and customary fees, and again, the OASW MBA fee guidelines. Always attach that as well, because that will show a nice range for social workers in the sector based on education and training and years of working in this field. Next slide. Again, as you were mentioning, Kim, I mean, so much work went into goes into the LAT. So as much of that can be done ahead of time. And you saw the LAT decisions that didn't have this detail. Don't give them reason to deny, and to not go in our favor. Provide everything up front. So reference the college regulation scope, standard of practice, codes that we use on the OCF 18s, be detailed and really align them with what you're actually doing and what the injuries are of the clients and the specific modalities you will be using. So there are some generic ones, but be more detailed. Also, these, I didn't even realize, Kim, they were something different. I've just always used them, the Z codes or Z codes. Things that are perhaps outside of a specific injury or disability, but things in clients' lives that cause challenges. So the code like Z73, problems related to life management difficulty, or Z64, problems related to certain psychosocial circumstances. I mean, lay them out, put as many, as are relevant and indicated for your specific clients. Be very detailed in what you do. Again, you mentioned about the case managers being paid in accordance with their profession. I think Kim is the guru in speaking about that. So pick her brain if need be, because she's a genius when it comes to that. But again, that LAT decision was wonderful and really highlighted the skills necessary for a social work case manager in this sector. And before you submit a treatment plan, it's a really good practice to get into to contact the adjuster. If the adjuster likes you, sees, the work that you're doing, has a heads up, they might be more likely to approve your plan and the rate as is. Maybe, but it's always a good idea to have or establish that relationship ahead of them just, receiving an OCF 18 for social work out of the blue. It's an opportunity to let them know why, your rationale and justification for why this referral came to you and why the specific client might need a social worker on their treatment team. And last but not least, if and when your rate is reduced, send a memo, as Kim had highlighted, and Eden as well, about why you disagree, and highlight all these different areas and pieces of information that we're gathering today. And I'm sure many of you already do this, but why the rate that you're proposing is reasonable, and provide lat decisions, provide your credentials, provide anything you have in your back pocket to show your worth as a social worker, and especially for the clients that we serve. I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dina. Thanks to everybody. I've got a couple slides to finish us off with, which just really talk about kind of current work that's underway. I do want to remind everybody that they're very welcome to use the Q&A function, which is at the middle of the bottom of your screen, if you have any questions for any of us. And of course, you may also use the chat function to share thoughts with the entire group, or with a one-on-one or a smaller subset. I just want to give people a sense of what the kind of things that we're looking at. Absolutely, we're looking at updating the MVA fee recommendations that Dina and Kim and others have mentioned, and providing those kind of more formal updates about the experience of social workers who have had some success in terms of challenging the hourly rate, including the sharing of lat decisions. Of course, there's always something to be learned by things that are not successful, but there's even something more to be learned from the ones where we have been successful. Next slide, please. I just want to let people know that we participate in a coalition with other professional associations. In fact, Kim is co-chair of that. We find it pretty helpful for exchanging information with our colleagues in other professions, and we have had some success in having the other professions support positions of OASW, for example, about inclusion on the professional service guidelines. And on the next slide, you'll see that there's another initiative underway, which is a research project that's being led by a professor at Sheridan College named Nathaniel Barr. OASW has agreed to participate in this research and has made a financial contribution, which is surveying auto accident victims and the professionals who care for them to document that experience. We know, I alluded to this before, but we know that the most important thing from a policy perspective is to demonstrate that the way social workers are being treated is not just bad for social workers, it has an impact on people's access to care. And so we really want to be able to document the fact that access to care is critically important and is potentially in jeopardy as people's hourly rates are increasingly challenged, or the lack of indexation for all the rates means that, in essence, professionals are being paid less and less every year. So those are the things that are underway. We do have a few minutes for questions. I do want to just quickly address a couple of things that were in the chat. So to Ann Cole, I want to your comment about it being the recognition. Kim kind of alluded to this. The Regulated Health Professions Act could not be clearer, that although social workers are not under the Regulated Health Professions Act, that act provides social workers with the authority to be delivering psychotherapy services. So yes, you're right. There is an irony in that being ignored when it could not be clearer in law. On the question of the adjudicators, that's, I have to say, that's an angle that had never occurred to me before. So that's an interesting one. I can let you know that adjudicators on the License Appeals Tribunal are what's called order in council appointments, which means they're appointed by, in essence, cabinet. The exact process that the ministry goes through to screen and recommend, I'm not familiar with it. I have a feeling that in a case involving a social worker, a social worker would not be allowed to make that decision, but that's just me as the amateur lawyer saying that. Hourly rate proposed to government. Kim, you want to help me out here and remind me what it is exactly we said last year? We said usual customary rate.
Yep. We didn't land on a number, right? Because it's going to, I think, right, what I recall of our conversation, Barney, is we anticipate, right, that we don't want to be told, right? We don't want someone who doesn't understand what usual and customary is to decide for us, right? So it's going to involve discussion, I think, right? Looking at usual and customary, right, in Ontario, but we're not in a position yet because they haven't even said, yeah, like, we're allowed to be on the fees guideline. We haven't even gotten past that hump yet to even have a conversation around hourly rates.
There is another question in the Q&A box, which I can't answer, but can I submit a claim directly to insurance for social work treatment without a psych assessment? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I would say absolutely you can. It does not, social workers we're able to do our own assessments and determine whether social work treatment is needed and propose that on a treatment plan. The hitch is that we do need someone to sign Part 4, but it doesn't mean that a psychological assessment is required, and what I'm assuming, right, by a psychologist in order for a social worker to provide treatment. Anybody else? Eden, Dina, Mandy?
Like, absolutely. You
Go
don't need to have, sorry, you don't need to have a psych assessment because a lot of the services that we offer, we can do without a diagnosis. And if they send back a note saying it requires a diagnosis, then you can get a note from the doctor and call the adjuster and say that that is what we're able to get right now, because an assessment by a psychologist is going to delay services by months, and that would be re-traumatizing for the client. So advocacy is everything. The more you get on the phone and explain our role and explain why you are asking to do what you're doing with the client's consent, then the psych assessment's a different thing.
We have another question in the chat, which is, how do you navigate when your planning time is denied and your session time reduced significantly? Anybody want to address that one?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but certainly applies. And, I can certainly also say that this is an issue that's impacting all professions right now. This is a trend, that insurers, are reducing your planning time, your meeting time. They might cut it in half. They may give you nothing for it, right? And I think my take on it and my most recent conversation with an insurer around a physiotherapy treatment plan, because my role is case management, and that decision, right, not to provide hours for the physiotherapist to do what they need to do in accordance with their regulation and standards of practice, means that, my client doesn't get the best service, right? So this physiotherapist, or us in that situation, we're being handcuffed, right, to being able to stay with our standards of practice. So I think, the best response would be is to go to the standards of practice, have a conversation with the adjuster, that's rooted in that, and to try and compel them to change their mind. But I think this just seems to be a blanket habit that's happening without much thought behind it. And perhaps thinking that, providers are gouging or somehow inflating the hourly rates, and what we need to tie it to instead is our standards of practice and why it's required, and demonstrate that. Back page might be helpful again for that.
Thank you. Anybody else have a thought on that?
Yeah, I can just say or speak to what we do. As insurers are increasingly denying all sorts of line items on treatment plans, I'm starting to be a bit more flexible in terms of, what I will work around, planning time or session time being two of those things. The one thing I never work around, and I hope other people adopt the same practice, is the rate. Never do I take less than what is on the treatment plan. And so that's my way of being flexible is, okay, if we can't do an hour and a half session, I'll do an hour. If I need to do planning in a session with the client, I'll do it in the session with the client. But the rate is the rate, and people know across the board, I will not negotiate that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dina. I don't think it serves any of us well to negotiate, because if you've got different hourly rates that you're accepting from different people, you also set your own precedents. And I don't think it would serve you well to go to a LAT and have that also come out in a similar way, right? That in my case, I was able to point out to the LAT adjudicator that the insurer paid me to, approve my hourly rate on one hand over here, and then 5 days later, a different hourly rate over here. That same kind of thing could, I would be concerned that it would come back and bite us in the butt if we negotiate. So set your hourly rate, know what it's based on, use the standards of practice, right? Know what is usual and customary, be able to demonstrate that. If you're able to, right, demonstrate that you've taken context into consideration as well. Because in my case too, right, they tried to argue that the sector, right, they use the argument that this sector pays lower than, than the usual and customary, right? Than the market rates or the private practice rates. But I was able to say, look, when I set my hourly rate, I took that into consideration, and it's already lower, right? Which most of ours are, right? Than the usual and customary rates, who work in this sector. Most of us, are not, that I know of, right? Are not using excessive fees, right, in this sector.
So we have another question that came in the Q&A, and I'll just read it. So given what Kim is presenting, I wonder why our own association is not fighting more ferociously for us, and why we are left to do it on our own devices, when clearly it should have more clout at a higher level. So I'll just take a stab at addressing that question as the interim director of policy. So I'll just say that we have obviously have a history in this area. We have a record of being vocal with government. I have a feeling that our tactics are probably, perhaps they don't do justice to the anger that individual members feel. I'll just say as a response that we take our mandate to represent the profession, the entire profession, to government very seriously. Sometimes that means that we choose our spots, and sometimes it means that we adopt tactics and strategies where we seek to find greater alignment with the government in order to make progress on representing social workers. It's not an easy balance to strike, but I appreciate that people are angry about their rate, which is why we're active in this space. And if it appears that our approach lacks ferocity, I'll just say that I appreciate that it may not do justice to the anger that people feel. I don't want to sound defensive about that, but that's what I'll offer by way of response to that.
I think too, like in my roles, what I've learned, right, is that knocking on government's doors. So how do you get hourly rates changed, right? How do you get it changed? We're not on the PSG rate now, which means that, the best that we can do is, put forward what our hourly rate is, based on our standards of practice, and try and defend those, right? When it comes to, and I think OASW, right, has the fees guideline, right? We're looking at that. We're looking at ways to presently, right, as a committee, I think on a go forward basis, we're trying to look at ways to educate, right, to raise the profile in this sector of social workers, to educate, about what we do, what our training is, and so on. I think that's one way that, we can get somewhere, right, to get a little bit more respect around it, and rates that are commensurate. But, we've also got, a sector where, OASW, right, the best that we can do, or, as members, like working with OASW, right, is request guidelines. There's no enforcement that OASW is empowered or authorized really to do. So the tools to try and work on these things are, go to government, which OASW is, right? Keep supporting by way of guidelines, which I think, is what we'd love ideas from everybody who's here today, right? What more would you like to see, like concrete ideas? What do you think would be helpful? So we can keep working on those things.
We have a comment in the chat about, I've had an initial treatment plan approved at a full rate and the second plan at a lesser rate. Is this common for others? Do any of the panelists want to comment on that?
Dina, you go.
Yeah, Eden can speak to this as well. She deals with this every day. And yeah, it happens, as I think, Eden, you mentioned at the beginning. It happens on the same files within the same company, from treatment plan to treatment plan. I mean, the only thing I would do is call the adjuster and point out it could be an error, ask for their justification and rationale, how they could approve one at one rate and one. Usually when they see that they've done that, they will, reverse their bad decision, because that's just complete and sheer ignorance and stupidity on their part.
Or reverse the good one.
Or
But
hopefully the
yeah.
good one came first. Yeah.
I try and look up the legislation as to what they can and can't do at the insurer level, and show them that I'm serious and that I do my research, and also point out the impact on clients that get moved around from provider to provider. It's re-traumatizing for them. They've built a trusting relationship with a social worker, and the rate that they reduce to is a block to continue with that provider. So I find insurance companies don't want people to have to change providers. So, I mean, it's with the ones that are workable, it's been effective, but the other ones that are consistently bad, they don't screw up really. They don't have the same mistakes. But yeah, I mean, you just have to show them that you're serious, and highlight in a letter that every single thing that's done on the file that's been happened, and how inconsistent it is, and how non-transparent it is, and what it does to the client.
Yeah. Mandy, any thoughts? No.
There's a interesting question in the Q&A, which says, do you think if we could be recognized truly as a registered health profession, not just in the context of social workers providing psychotherapy, that would help? And I think that's a really interesting one. I can't help but look at it from a historical context. This profession spent decades arguing that it should be professionally regulated, and it won that argument 25 years ago. And perhaps, 7 years ago or whenever it was, when the College of Psychotherapy was established, and I wasn't around, but for that fight as an OASW staff person, but I understand it was quite a fight to have the authority to practice psychotherapy recognized within the Registered Health Professions Act explicitly, so that it wasn't restricted to those RHPA professions. It's a great question, but it's probably, in terms of if we were to change that, we're looking at a long fight on that one.
Sure. I just want to add, because I'm not sure about this question, Barney, right? We are regulated health professionals, right? We are regulated under the Social Work and Social Service Work Act of 1998, as Barney alluded to, right? So we're recognized as regulated health professionals in the SABs. I think what sometimes causes confusion is because we're regulated not under the Ministry of, not like it's a different regulation, right? It's not under the Ministry of Health, it's over under ComSoc, I think, right? So sometimes people miss that, or they like it's a comparator or a parallel thing, right? But we're regulated health professionals. Even though it's not under the Regulated Health Professions Act. It's a different act, but we're regulated health professionals. So I think that's why we get missed sometimes, right? Or there's this assumption that we're not regulated health professionals. And so we need to educate and bring that to the awareness of the public and the adjusters and the adjudicators and everybody else.
Yeah. So we're at 5:44. I just want to let people know that if they have more questions, they're very welcome to contact us at OASW. Simplest way to do that is an email address, which you can also find on our website, which is policy@oasw.org. There is one more question that we haven't addressed, and that question is, could the college have a role in approaching government, since the college regulates us, and the impact on the public client? I think that's worth exploring. I can tell you that there have been times where there have been disputes with insurance companies about coverage. This is mostly on the extended health benefits, and where an insurance provider will say, well, we're covering psychotherapy and social workers don't deliver psychotherapy. We have engaged with the college to, if it's based on really explicit misinformation, that the college can say, and remember, the college doesn't represent social workers. It protects the public interest first and foremost, but it interprets that public interest mandate as being able to, as sort of correcting some of the misunderstandings about social work that impede access to care and are contrary to the public interest. So I think that's worth exploring. We do have a good relationship with them, and there have been times where they have joined us in signing letters where it's clearly based on a misunderstanding about the nature of social work.
I think what was alarming to me too on that same issue, Barney, is seeing in the LAT decisions, right, how social workers are, misrepresented, right, as unregulated health professionals, right? That's misleading to the public, and I would think that our college might have an interest in that.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody who presented today, and I want to thank everybody who showed up and participated. I'll just say one more time, policy@oasw.org is a good way to get in touch with us. Kim, are you willing to have the last word on today's webinar? And is there any closing thought that you would want to leave us with?
Oh, I'm on the spot. I don't know. I just want to thank everybody, for coming. It was a good response that we had for this webinar. It's a challenging topic. My hope in, helping to organize, right, the information that we presented today is in hoping that we can present in a more, unified front around this issue, right? Like, and understand sort of the complexities of what we're dealing with, and and hope that what we've been able to present today will be helpful to everybody going forward, right? So there's still more work to be done. We're not stopping with this webinar, obviously, but please, if you have any thoughts, comments, ideas, send them over to OASW so we can work on them. We're better together.